2 years ago, I made a video called The Truth About New Age Spirituality. It was a video essay of the both positive and negative things I'd witnessed within the New Age community. Today, I wanted to take more of a personal angle and really just reflect on my own spiritual experiences, everything that I've kind of learnt on this path of being spiritual, as well as certain pitfalls I feel are in place within spiritual communities. So a little background on me. My parents are super spiritual. I grew up with very alternative thinking. I went to a Steiner school, which is kind of an alternative education. I grew up in the Byron Shire. When I feel my spiritual journey really began was in 2020. I was 17 years old. I ended up taking MDMA. It wasn't my first time taking it. I was with an ex-boyfriend at the time. I just suddenly had all of these realizations about certain friendships in my life, certain people in my life, and I just suddenly had this purging process where all the things that I previously was trying to ignore in my life, certain toxic patterns, ways that I was deceiving myself or others really came to light, and it was a really insane experience for me. I also had in that trip, I had these strange intuitions about things that I didn't know, I shouldn't have known in any conscious way, and they turned out to be right. So that was my first kind of psychedelic, crazy spiritual sort of experience. And I have a lot to say on that. I have a lot to unpack in terms of those experiences in general and sometimes the pitfalls of them. But that kind of started my own spiritual awakening process, my own spiritual journey. I personally am a believer that starting to truly awaken spiritually is essentially just the process of self-individuation that I believe that everybody goes through to some extent. To me, my spiritual journey was a commitment to truth. That was really the beginning for me. I started speaking my truth. This was really not an easy thing. It's a process that made me so much stronger, but that meant I lost a lot of friends. I had a lot of difficult conversations, and this was the first real time that I truly learned how to set boundaries. So that's one manifestation of how I felt I started to walk more of a spiritual path. And to me, again, a spiritual path is simply this process of healing, which comes from truth, and this process of just becoming closer to who I authentically am. I definitely reflect back, and I can see that while there was genuine grounds to the realizations I was having in that time, I definitely fell into a bit of a pitfall with kind of giving everything meaning or kind of spiritualizing everything that was happening. I think this is just one of the pitfalls that can happen when you become so-and-so spiritual, you're spiritually awakened or walking the spiritual path. So alongside genuine real life hard shit changes and actions and truths I was speaking and living out, there was also definitely an ungroundedness in that time for me. From my experience within the Byron Shire, there's a lot of people that are spiritual hippies into these new age practices. I really see how taking on this spiritual identity is such a pitfall to thinking that you're better than other people, getting an ego, looking down on regular people. I also think when you label yourself as spiritual or evolved, it's okay to acknowledge things about yourself, but sometimes when you over-identify with a certain trait, you become closed off to a situation where you may not have acted with maturity or with spiritual wisdom or whatever. And I think that can happen a lot when people go on this spiritual path and get super attached to being mature or being wise or being spiritually evolved, and then it becomes a blind spot for them. I have noticed that. Or even it becomes superficial, certain clothes they wear, or they don't care about materialism, so they're just gonna wear these simple clothes, and that's fine. And I'm not saying that's always rooted in an ego around it, but when it comes to doing that and then judging other people, I don't like it. Actually, paradoxically, less evolved, I think that I'm passionate about spirituality being accessible to more people, spirituality not having to be taking psychedelics or wearing certain clothes or having a lot of crystals. It's simply just the process of self-inquiry, of healing, of learning to listen to your intuition, listening to your gut, just this process of self-individuation that is actually a human process. I also really believe, I'm so passionate about this is why I wanted to talk about it today, is doing the actual real spiritual work. It's not pretty, and it's like the hard daily shit. Showing up every day, it's being kind to people, it's being vulnerable, it's being courageous with your life and following what you really want to pursue. It's humbling yourself when you inevitably make a mistake. It's learning to take accountability. It's literally things like, in my opinion, like fucking doing the dishes and how you just are showing up, and all of these things that are both small and big, and how you're showing up every day. And I just see a lot of people that get too trapped into this spiritual identity and kind of lose that groundedness and practicality that we all need to be having this human experience. I'm saying this because I have noticed that in myself. Yes, it may have been true that there were moments where I acted with wisdom or with maturity, but I'm also very much still was capable and am capable now of being incredibly immature or childish or making a mistake or being inconsiderate or being unkind. Like, I am never above those impulses. I would love to create more conversations about grounded spirituality that everybody can practice. Just, yeah, my personal belief is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So inherently on the deepest level, we are spiritual. I also want to be really honest. Growing up with like personal development and spiritual thinking was like obviously really positive for me in a lot of ways. I think it's the reason why I can express myself freely. I feel like I can let the weirdness out. I've always valued self-reflection. These are ideas that I was introduced to from a very early age. The pitfall of this, and I'm talking about from as young as like, I can remember starting to like go to puberty. I was like workshopping dramas I was having with my friends at like 13 years old, and like doing belief turnarounds and finding their perspective and empathizing. Like, I was doing that when I was 13 years old. But what it did create was, as a child, I think I'd learned to intellectualize my emotions rather than learn to feel them first. I think that because I was so accustomed to jumping to the lesson, jumping to the wisdom, seeing the higher perspective in the situation, going towards compassion, actually what it taught me was to not allow myself to feel the emotion that a certain situation, a certain person made me feel, and to give myself that moment and maybe that childlike reaction of like, I'm angry, this hurt, you hurt me, like, fuck you. I really have realized through therapy and getting older that like there is such a place and such a fucking necessity for being able to sit with that moment where before you've processed anything, you give yourself that moment to be fucking upset or to be fucking hurt or to be fucking angry or frustrated or petty about something that affected you, rather than jumping towards trying to be mature. And then it becomes that like pseudo spirituality or pseudo wisdom where you're actually not healed past it, but you're just trying to create the appearance that you are. Yes, I am a believer that like we are all consciousness, we're all one, we're all connected. I believe that. I feel that. I also think we are having a human experience. We are having a human experience. Unless you are a monk, unless you are pursuing this path of enlightenment and that's your path, for many of us it isn't. You are a human. You are a human with human desires, with human impulses, with human emotions, and that is perfectly okay. I really believe that we're on this earth for different purposes, a lot of which is to learn from these human experiences, to feel the highs and lows, to go on this journey, to learn more about what it is to be human, to learn more about life, to learn more about connection, creation. Like, I'm so passionate about that. And sometimes I see spiritual thinking being used to scapegoat human emotions. It makes me really sad for spirituality to be used to like scapegoat feeling really human things or not allowing yourself to feel really human things, when a lot of the purpose of having this human experience is to feel really human things and to experience really human things. To be a human is to be imperfect. To be a human is to feel grief, is to feel any emotion, is to feel anger, is to feel sadness, is to feel love, is to feel joy, is to feel let down, disappointed, angry, resentful, jealous. All of these human emotions, you're allowed to feel them, and it doesn't make you not valid or not spiritual. I just think it's so important to not let spirituality take away our right to feel these human things. And I've seen that a lot. And I've experienced that myself. I also want to talk a little bit about psychedelics. I've dabbled in psychedelics, as I mentioned. I had that night on MD and I had all these realizations, woohoo. I'm not somebody that loves taking drugs. I've definitely gone through phases, mainly when I was in high school, where I did take drugs from then and there. It's not something that I want to do on any consistent basis. Let me spill the tea on some psychedelic experiences, because I think that psychedelic are one way that people go into trips or like deluded thinking that they think is like them having this spiritual experience, but actually they're kind of spiraling. I think that can happen, and not to a severe degree, but I've definitely had moments where I have had that kind of experience. I talked about this in my New Age video, actually, like people pave themselves deeper into their own delusions of love and light and healing, and nobody understands me and I'm just more evolved than everyone. That's one pitfall that can happen. I also think the realizations that I had that night on MD, I reflect back on it, and it's not like I could never have had those realizations without the MD. I think that I kind of trust that like I would have come to maturity and started to realize these things on my own. I saw this thing, I think it's this quote, I don't know who said it, but I don't know if they're referring to ayahuasca or just psychedelics in general, but sometimes there's a tendency for it to be unearned wisdom. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective on it. And I can relate to that in some way of like, sometimes when you have psychedelic experiences, you have this like intense, whoa experience where you may realize all these things. Suddenly you can see your life so much clearer. And I know for so many people and myself, that can be an incredibly positive experience, and don't want to take away the nuance of that. It can be an incredible experience. It can be a really intense experience, but I think that so much of the like actual meaningful growth that I've had in my life, actual meaningful progress, actual meaningful maturity has been from slowly, consistently over a long period of time, showing up, experiencing things, and just that slow learning. And I think sometimes with psychedelics, there's this temptation of like, you're trying to get all the answers and you want to have this big experience. And sometimes that can lead to a lot of growth, but I think that the slow progressive growth of life, of showing up, of experiencing things is undefeated. And that is where real individuation and real spiritual growth and real just human development occurs. I also think some people are like, their system and their mind and their body just does not mesh well with psychedelics. And I want to warn people about that. I think that's everything that I needed to say. I hope that if you're somebody that, has had negative experiences with people that regard themselves spiritual or in general, made it maybe a little bit more accessible for you, or I hope that you've related to it in some way. One thing that I saw Rick Rubin say recently is every lesson that you hear, think of how the counter could be just as true. And I think that's very true. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in my next video.